We saw a magic giant grow. Ow! And Gladys giggled, "Ooh, let me glow!"
The 70s were the greatest decade to be an American kid. There was no YouTube Kids, no Netflix, not this endless ocean of content popping up every second. There were only shows like The Electric Company where kids were taught how to read, how to listen, how to put letters together in the most fun and smartest way. What is fascinating is that back then most of us had no idea. The Electric Company had brought together an amazing lineup of faces, from Rita Moreno, Morgan Freeman, and the very first core cast to the added cast members and even the short Circus kids. But where are those first teachers of ours? Now today, let's look back at them in 2026. And trust me, this is not just a story about who is still here, who is gone, or how much they changed. I have also tucked in a few interesting facts behind each cast group, and a couple of them are honestly worth sticking around for till the end. Number 1. Rita Moreno. First up is Rita Moreno. The name tied forever to our legendary series. Her full name is Rosa Dolores Alverio Marcano, and she was born on December 11, 1931, in Humacao, Puerto Rico. When The Electric Company premiered in 1971, she was 40 years old, and now she is 95. Rita Moreno came into this show with a kind of status very few people in the cast had. She had already won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for West Side Story in 1962, and she was the first Hispanic woman to ever win an Oscar. On The Electric Company, she was one of the central faces, showing up as characters like Millie, the helper, Carmela Pandora, the little girl, and the director. But audiences remember her most for the line, "Hey you guys," tied to Millie. Right before she took the show, she had actually been warned not to do children's television because people were afraid it would typecast her even more. But the truth is, by then, Rita Moreno had already been dealing with typecasting for a long time. After her Oscar, Hollywood kept pushing her into the same ethnic roles instead of giving her the big parts she really deserved. In the early 1960s, her personal life also went through a very dark stretch, a stormy relationship with Marlon Brando, a pregnancy followed by a botched abortion, and one suicide attempt using Brando's own sleeping pills. So, The Electric Company was not a step backward. It was a way to stay in the business at a time when Hollywood still did not know how to use her the right way. Later on, Rita Moreno kept going a very long way, completing the EGOT with a Grammy, a Tony, and an Emmy, and to this day, she is still seen as one of the living legends of American entertainment. Number 2. Morgan Freeman. Next is Morgan Freeman, another core face of The Electric Company. He was born on June 1, 1937, in Memphis, Tennessee. When the show premiered, he was 34 years old. Today, he is 89. Unlike Rita Moreno, Morgan Freeman came into this show while he was still trying to find his place. He had served in the United States Air Force from 1955 to 1959, and only after that did he fully move into theater and acting in New York. TV Guide once called The Electric Company his first real breakthrough on television. On the show, Morgan Freeman was part of the original cast and one of the most versatile performers there. Audiences remember him most as Easy Reader, but he also played several other characters like Count Dracula, Mel Mounds, Marcello, Mark, and the Cop. What matters here is that in the early 1970s, nobody was looking at him as some future movie star yet. To viewers back then, he was a familiar face from children's television. Morgan Freeman's road moved a lot slower than a lot of other people's, but it took him incredibly far. After The Electric Company, he kept doing theater, showed up in Brubaker and Another World, then really broke through with Street Smart in 1987, the film that brought him his first Oscar nomination. After that came Driving Miss Daisy, Unforgiven, The Shawshank Redemption, and finally, an Oscar for $1 Million Baby. Looking back at The Electric Company, Now the most interesting thing is that we are seeing the very early chapter of a legend before the whole world knew his name. Number 3. Judy Graubart. Judy Graubart was not the biggest name in the cast, but if you are talking about the people who kept the electric company running in the right rhythm, she is one of the first names that has to come up. She was born on October 5, 1943 in Fort Worth, Texas. When the show premiered in 1971, Judy was 28. This year, she is 83. What made Judy Graubart stand out was that she was not tied to just one role. She played hundreds of characters across all 6 seasons, and that is exactly why audiences remembered her for so long. The names people usually bring up the most are Jennifer of the Jungle, Julia Grown Up, the Witch, and Winnie. Before joining the electric company, Judy came up through Second City in Chicago, the place that trained some truly great sketch and improv performers. She had worked in the same world as Fred Willard, Peter Boyle, Richard Libertini, and Robert Klein, and she was also a regular on Comedy Tonight on CBS in 1970. That background explains exactly why she fit this show so well. Later on, she appeared in Simon Author and Judy Berlin, and she also did commercials and voiceover work for many years. Judy married actor Bob Dishy in 1986 and has 2 children. Her life was pretty steady compared with a lot of actors from that same era. Number 4. Skip Hinnant. Skip Hinnant was the kind of face anybody who grew up with the electric company would remember fast, even if he was not a star in the usual Hollywood sense. His full name was Joseph Howard Hinnant, and he was born on September 12, 1940, on Chincoteague Island, Virginia. When the show premiered in 1971, he was 31 years old. This year, he is 86. Skip was part of the core cast from the start, and on the show he was basically the guy who carried the weirdest characters. Audiences remember him most as Fargo North Decoder in one of the show's most famous wordplay bits, and then as the boy in Love of Chair. He also played Frankenstein JJ and Superman. Before joining the electric company, Skip Hinnant already had television experience playing Ted in The Patty Duke Show from 1963 to 1965. In 1967, he also created the role of Schroeder in the first off-Broadway production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, while his brother Bill Hinnant played Snoopy in the same show. What made Skip's career even stranger is that just 1 year after the electric company began, he went on to voice the title character in Fritz the Cat in 1972, then followed that with The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat in 1974. On one side, you had educational television for children. On the other, one of the most famous adult animated films of that era. And Skip Hinnant moved through both worlds like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later on, he kept doing voice work, appearing in The Easter Bunny is Coming to Town and I Go Pogo, and then gradually stepped away from television to focus more on voice acting. Number 5. Lee Chamberlin. Lee Chamberlin was actually a pretty unusual case on the electric company. She was part of the original cast, but she was only with the show for the first 2 seasons from 1971 to 1973. So, a lot of longtime viewers sometimes forget that she was one of the faces who helped build the series from the ground up in those first days. Lee Chamberlin was born on February 14, 1938 in New York City, and her birth name was Alverta Lapallo. When the show premiered in 1971, she was 33 years old. On the electric company, she appeared in roles like Brenda Gladys, the Glowworm, Madame Rosalie, and Vi. What is worth pointing out is that before stepping into children's television, Lee Chamberlin had already built a pretty wide-ranging career path. She had worked with Pearl Primus's dance company in Harlem, spent time in France singing and releasing records, and even performed at l'Olympia in Paris. After that, she came back to America, sang in the Playboy Club circuit, and only then moved more heavily into theater and television. After the Electric Company, she went on to have a much fuller career than a lot of people realize, from Shakespeare in the Park with King Lear to 2 Sidney Poitier films, Uptown Saturday Night and Let's Do It Again. Then Roots: The Next Generations, and the role of Pat Baxter on All My Children. Later on, she also wrote and directed, started a project in France supporting black playwrights, and her play Struttin' won 6 Audelco Awards in 1988. Lee Chamberlin died of cancer on May 25, 2014, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at the age of 76. She lived a fairly full life, moving through theater, television, music, and writing, and she left her mark in a very personal and lasting way. Number 6. Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was the most famous name in the core cast when the Electric Company first started. He was born on July 12, 1937 in Philadelphia. When the show premiered in 1971, he was 34 years old. This year, he is 89. Unlike a lot of the other cast members, Bill Cosby came into the show as a real television star. Before that, he had already made his name with I Spy from 1965 to 1968, becoming the first black man to star in a leading role in a dramatic series on American network television, and that role won him 3 Emmy Awards. Right after that came The Bill Cosby Show television specials and a string of Grammy-winning comedy albums. Then, his career climbed even higher with Fat Albert and The Cosby Kids, and especially The Cosby Show, one of the most successful sitcoms in the history of American television. But the later part of his life was heavily overshadowed by more than 50 sexual assault accusations. In 2018, he was convicted in the Andrea Constand case, and then in 2021, that conviction was overturned by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Most recently, in March 2026, a civil jury in California found him liable in the Donna Motzinger assault case and awarded nearly $60 million in damages. Bill Cosby is still alive, but at 89, his public image has almost completely changed. Number 7. Jim Boyd. Jim Boyd was born on November 11, 1933, in Philadelphia. When the show premiered in 1971, he was 38 years old. What is interesting is that in the first season, audiences usually heard Jim Boyd before they really saw him, because he mostly worked as an off-camera voice actor and puppeteer. By season 2, he started appearing on screen regularly and became a familiar part of the core cast. On the show, Jim Boyd was tied to characters like Jay, Arthur Crank, Paul the Gorilla, the Blue Beetle, the Wolfman, Andy, and Lorelei Loverly. Before that, Jim Boyd had served 4 years in the United States Air Force, studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and then did voice work for puppets on The Surprise Show in New York. It was through that line of work that Children's Television Workshop came to him when they were putting together the Electric Company. After the show, he kept working pretty steadily with Out to Lunch, an episode of Law and Order, and even the retrospective special, The Electric Company's Greatest Hits and Bits, in 2006. Jim Boyd died on January 2, 2013, after a short illness at the age of 79. He was never as flashy as a few of the other big names in the core group, but he was one piece that was very hard to replace. And when you look back at all 7 of those faces, there are still a few small interesting stories behind them worth bringing up. And I'm going to get into those right now. The first interesting thing is that even the 2 biggest names in this group, Rita Moreno and Morgan Freeman, both looked at the Electric Company with a little hesitation. Rita Moreno had been advised not to take a children's show if she did not want Hollywood to typecast her even more. And Morgan Freeman later admitted that he had worried he might get stuck forever with the image of children's television. The second detail is a lot more fun. Rita Moreno's line, "Hey, you guys did not just blow up on television. Kids took it straight into the schools." Moreno said children were yelling that line all through the hallways, to the point that principals were going crazy. You would never expect that, right? And the last detail is the one that really makes people look back at their own memories. Bill Cosby and Lee Chamberlin actually left the show pretty early after season 2. But because their old filmed segments kept getting reused for years after that, audiences still felt like they had stayed around much longer than they really did. And that is exactly why the Electric Company never really stood still with one fixed lineup. The later seasons brought in a few more very memorable faces too, and that was also when the show started expanding into a different kind of flavor. Number 8. Luis Ávalos. Luis Ávalos was not part of the opening group of the Electric Company, but he ended up being one of the longest-lasting added faces on the show. He was born on September 2, 1946 in Havana, Cuba. When he joined the show in 1972, he was 26. On the Electric Company, he stood out most as Dr. Doolots, a character that mixed Dr. Dolittle with Groucho Marx, and then as Igor Pedro and Roberto. Before he got into children's television, Luis Ávalos already had a pretty solid theater background. He studied at New York University, then worked with the Lincoln Center Repertory Theater. After the Electric Company, he kept going strong in the business with films and series like Condo E.R. Barney Miller, Jungle 2 Jungle Hollywood Homicide, and The Ringer. In 2000, he also founded the America's Theater Arts Foundation in Los Angeles to support stage works inspired by Latin American culture. He was a truly wonderful man because he did not just perform, he also wanted to help open doors for voices like his own. Luis Ávalos passed away on January 22, 2014 in Burbank, California, from heart failure at the age of 67, bringing to a close the life of a gifted and passionate man. Number 9. Hattie Winston. Hattie Winston is one of those faces a lot of people remember from Becker or Rugrats, and then only later realize she had once been a very familiar part of the Electric Company. She was born on March 3, 1945 in Lexington, Mississippi. When she joined the show in 1973, she was 28. This year, she is 81. Hattie Winston came to the Electric Company in Season 3, taking the place Lee Chamberlin left behind, and stayed with the show through 1977. Out of all her roles, viewers remember her most as Sylvia, and especially as Valerie the Librarian, the girlfriend of Easy Reader, played by Morgan Freeman. On top of that, she also played several villains in the Spidey Super Stories segments, like Queen Bee Queen of Diamonds, the Fox, and the Thumper. What set Hattie Winston apart from a lot of people on this list is that she already had a very strong background in theater and singing. She left the South at 14, went to high school in New York, then got a vocal scholarship to Howard University. After that, she made her way onto Broadway in shows like Hair the Me Nobody Knows and Two Gentlemen of Verona. After the Electric Company, she kept working steadily in Nurse Homefront as the voice of Lucy Carmichael in Rugrats, and then as Margaret Wyborn in Becker, the role most mainstream viewers ended up knowing her for later on. Hattie Winston married conductor Harold Wheeler, and the two of them have a daughter named Samantha. She is still alive, and she is one of the later era cast members who managed to keep one of the longest and steadiest careers of the whole group. Number 10. Danny Seagren. Danny Seagren is a really unusual case in the Electric Company because he is tied to one piece of memory that a lot of longtime viewers remember right away: Spider-Man. His full name was Daniel Morley Seagren, and he was born on November 15, 1943, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. When he joined the show in 1974, he was 31. What makes Danny Seagren even more memorable is that he is considered the first person ever to play Spider-Man in live action on screen. On the Electric Company, he was the one who helped the show step into a very different kind of memory, where educational television for kids suddenly brushed up against the world of superheroes. Before that, Danny had been trained by Jim Henson as a puppeteer, had worked in the world of the Muppets, and even filled in as Big Bird at times when Carol Spinney was not there. So before becoming the Spider-Man of one generation of young viewers, he had already come through a very recognizable kind of career path in American children's television. Later on, Danny Seagren kept working in children's entertainment and puppetry, with credits like The Great Santa Claus, Switch, The Frog Prince, The Muppet Musicians of Bremen, and Miss Peach of the Kelly School. He passed away on November 10, 2025, at the age of 81. Out of the added cast, Danny Seagren was probably the most unusual name, but he was also the one who left behind a very distinct branch of memory. And now let's set those names aside for a minute and look at a few interesting facts about them that very few people know. The first thing is that they did not all step into the electric company at the same time. Luis Ávalos came in during Season 2, Hattie Winston joined in Season 3, and Danny Seagren did not show up until Season 4. Because the show kept reusing some older segments from the earlier cast, a lot of viewers felt like the lineup on screen had not really changed much. But if you look closely, the electric company was actually always expanding one layer at a time, not just sitting there with one fixed cast. The second detail is a whole lot stranger. Danny Seagren really was the first person to play Spider-Man in live action on screen. But the Spider-Man on the electric company almost never spoke out loud and never took off the mask either. The reason was pretty simple. That segment was designed so kids would read the word balloons on the screen, which meant the character communicated in a very different way from the Spider-Man audiences got used to later on. And from that same Spidey Super Stories section, Marvel even developed a separate comic line that ran for 57 issues published from 1974 to 1982. For a children's educational show, that was a rare move and a pretty impressive one. And if this group helped make the show broader, then the final group brought a very different kind of youthful energy to the electric company. Number 11. June Angela. June Angela is a beautiful way to begin this teenage group because she was the only member of Short Circus who stayed with the electric company from the pilot all the way to the final day of filming. She was born on August 18, 1959. When the show began in 1971, June Angela was 12. This year she is 67. In the memory of a lot of viewers, she is Julie, the most familiar member of Short Circus. June Angela was not the kind of child star who showed up and then disappeared. From a young age, she had already been trained pretty seriously in singing, dancing, and acting. One of her earliest notable milestones was performing a soprano solo at New York City Opera when she was just 10. While she was with the electric company, she also sang on the show's Grammy-winning soundtrack album and received the Emmy Award of Honor. After the electric company gradually came to a close, June Angela kept going strong in the business. She appeared in Mr. T, and Tina then picked up more roles in E.R. Hannah Montana, Dexter MAD-TV, along with voice work in The Wild Thornberrys, Danny Phantom, and the English version of Kiki's Delivery Service. June Angela is still alive and still active in the arts. She is one of the clearest examples that the electric company did not just create childhood memories, it also opened up a very long career path. After June Angela, we come to another Short Circus face who did not stay as long but later exploded in a way very few people saw coming. Number 12. Irene Cara. Irene Cara did not stay on the electric company as long as June Angela, but she was the biggest breakout name to come out of Short Circus. She was born on March 18, 1959, in the Bronx, New York. When she appeared in the first season in 1971, Irene Cara was only 12. For the show's audience, she was one of the youngest faces in Short Circus. But the truth is, even before that, this little girl was already a pretty seasoned child performer, singing on Spanish-language television, appearing on the original Amateur Hour and The Tonight Show, and even recording music while she was still very young. After the Electric Company, Irene Cara moved fast. She appeared in Sparkle in 1976, then really exploded with fame in 1980, where she both played Coco Hernandez and sang the title song. The next peak was Flashdance. What a Feeling in 1983, the song that won her an Oscar, a Grammy, and a Golden Globe. But Irene Cara's career did not keep going in a straight line forever. In 1985, she sued her record label saying they had withheld her royalties, and even though she won the case in 1993, it ended up pushing her to the margins of the music industry. Irene Cara married Conrad Palmisano in 1986, divorced in 1991, and had no children. She passed away on November 25, 2022, at the age of 63. Number 13. Todd Graff. Todd Graff closes out today's list in a very different direction. He did not explode the way Irene Cara did, but he still went very far through writing, directing, and building stories from behind the camera. Todd Graff was born on October 22, 1959 in New York City. When he joined the Electric Company in 1975, he was 16. On the show, he played Jesse and was part of the final short Circus lineup, staying from 1975 to 1977, which means the last stretch of the series. What is interesting is that before joining the Electric Company, Todd Graff was already familiar with the world of children's television early on. He had voiced Choo Choo Charlie in Good and Plenty commercials, then sang on the early Sesame Street albums. So when he showed up in Short Circus, he was not some unknown boy walking onto a set for the first time. He already had a pretty solid background in children's entertainment. Later on, Todd Graff did not follow the teen star route. He gradually shifted into theater, got a Tony nomination for Baby, then kept acting in The Abyss, Strange Days, and Death to Smoochie. But the more significant part of his career came from behind the camera with Camp Bandslam and Joyful Noise, the films that made his name more associated with musical movies than with his image as a child performer from years earlier. Todd Graff is still alive and is still remembered as one of the people who made the most lasting turn away from the Electric Company. And before we wrap this up, there are still a few interesting facts about this teenage group that are well worth bringing up. Are you ready to unlock the last little treasure chest? Before wrapping up this list, there are still a few small facts about the teenage group from the Electric Company that a lot of viewers back then probably did not notice. First of all, even the name Short Circus was itself a wordplay joke. It came from the phrase short circuit, which fit perfectly with the show's quick, witty, slightly mischievous language. That name alone already shows this group was not there just for decoration. They were a piece that really matched the spirit of the Electric Company. The second fact is that a lot of viewers still remember Short Circus as one fixed group from beginning to end, but the truth is, the lineup changed quite a bit over the seasons. Some members were only there for a short time, some came in near the end, so audience memory tends to blend everybody together into one single group, even though that is not exactly how it really was. And in the middle of all those changes, June Angela was the only one who stayed with the show from the pilot all the way to the final day of filming. That is a really beautiful fact, because it makes her almost like the thread that ties together the whole memory of this teenage group. I really love shows like Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and Schoolhouse Rock. The 70s proved that learning could be both fun and meaningful. It was a very special time when television was not just trying to keep kids sitting still in front of the screen, but actually wanted to teach them how to read, listen, think, and remember through imagination, music, and laughter. Looking back at the Electric Company today, what moves me is not just how the cast has changed, but also the feeling that a whole philosophy of making children's programming has slipped into the past. Those faces do not just belong to an old series, they belong to a time when learning on TV still felt warm, smart, and full of personality. Now I want to hear from you. Who do you remember most from this cast? Share your memories in the comments. And if you love the classic shows from that golden era, as much as I do, subscribe to the channel so you can come along for the next look back.